when they're with this business or in their health, whatever, they fall back on their strengths. They rely on assets they already have. They go back to their primary skills. They go back to their main relationships, and they do not improvise. If you start to improvise, you start to do something you've never done before, or you want to. I mean, typically people when start a company they know nothing about. They go to a new territory. They have no contacts. This is most of the time a recipe for disaster. Do not trust this message you hear 24 hours a day. Just do it, just do it, just do it. This is foolish. History shows if you go this way, you increase the risk like hell. It's unnecessary to do like this. You will do much, much better if you systematically rely on your strengths.
Well, yeah, I can see that. Years and years ago, I had a friend in a computer business. He was doing really good. He had a couple software stores. He was making money. He was happy. And then he got bad advice from, some investment people telling him, well, you need to expand. You need to do this. And then he started expanding. Now all of a sudden he had like 14 locations. Now all of a sudden he wasn't making money. And then I watched everything go over about a period of a year or two. I mean, I watched stores close up right and left that he had. And then I watched him lose his house and his marriage and everything because he went past a point where he couldn't handle it. He didn't know what to do.
Yeah, this principle, I found it from someone called Kovalevsky. He was a paleontologist in the 19th century, and Kovalevsky figured out something that which is a very interesting story. When you go to museums in the U.S. and also in Australia, in Europe, you find very often fossils of very small horses. They are the size of a cat. And you find them basically in the U.S., they're in almost every city you can find these fossils. And in the 19th century, nobody could figure out how these small prehistoric animals, they became the horses we know today, which are very, very big animals, large, very strong, and very fast. And everybody thought these are different species. It's not possible that such a small horse becomes what we have today. And Kovalevsky came up with the idea, the principle that really goes in my book, because he figured out that these small horses, small animals, they became what we know today through disruptions. And the logic of Kovalevsky is very creative. Actually, he was a lawyer. He was not a paleontologist, but he became a paleontologist later on. And Kovalevsky figured out for the first time that these living in the woods, eating blades. Eventually, when the atmosphere, when the climate changed, the trees became too high, so they could not feed on blades. So they have to go to the prairie, and there they have to face a lot of predators because they have these big cats running after the little horses. So eventually, with each generation, they have to become a little bit faster, a little bit taller. And the ones that survived, they got more and more children, more and more little horses. And through generations, they became bigger and bigger. So eventually, through disruptions, they became stronger. And this principle runs in every living creature, including human beings. It is when you face disruptions from the right angle, and this is super important, the horses did not improvise. They just did what they did best, which was running. And this made them little by little, every generation, they made them stronger. And this is what people should do when you're facing big problems in your business or in your career. Do not improvise. Just go back to what you do best. 99% of the time is going to work fine.
Okay, now improvising, you're talking about where people basically it's not working out, so they're trying all these different things trying to make it work. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, but eventually the problem is when you try to do something and you have no backup. Let me just give you a little story. Look, one of the things people have to do today very often is to change jobs, sometimes even to change careers, and there is nothing against that. But you should do it in a clever way. When you try to move to a new city, to a new career, a new business, you have to do it carefully. Let me just give you an example. One of the great figures of the 1950s, 1960s was Albert Schweitzer. Albert Schweitzer was a professor in Europe, a professor of theology. He was giving classes in Strasbourg in the university, and he got the idea that he wanted to go to Africa and started. He became a very famous missionary in Africa. He went there. He started a hospital. So he changed his career and his life completely because he wasn't happy. But he did it in a very clever way. And there is a very interesting edge to the story that I think people should take into account when they get into a new territory. And Schweitzer was happy as a professor. He wanted to do something else. Like many people today who want to change their lives, they want to change their careers. But instead of going into his new life blindly, because he knew the risk was very high, it could be a spectacular failure, he did it very cleverly. He did the following. He used to play music on the church every Sunday. He was a very accomplished organ performer. And when he went to Africa, he took with him a second-hand upright piano to Africa. He bought it very inexpensively, and he took it with him and his wife. They took it to Africa. They started a hospital, but Schweitzer continued to practice every day for 1 hour in the middle of nowhere in Africa, because he knew that if his new career failed, if it was a total disaster, and very often he ran out of money, he could always go back to Europe and make money giving concerts. And he did it through the decades. He did it repeatedly. He ran out of money. He had problems in his mission in Africa. So he went back to Europe and for a few months, and he raised money by giving concerts. And this is a perfect example what to do if you're changing careers, you're changing jobs, you're going into a new city. Always keep your best skill at a high level, because it will make you 100% stress-free, because you know that even if your new business or your new career fails, you can always go back to your basic skills. And don't be foolish to give everything up and to start a new business or a new career, because you will make yourself so stressed and so anxious that you will undermine your performance.
Oh, yeah. I will say this. I've known people through the years. I'm up in age. I'm 67. But in my younger years, I've known people that they would start a business. It would be doing okay, but then they figured, well, I don't really want to do this. So they changed the business, changed what they were doing that was working out, and they tried something else, and they tried that 3 or 4 times, and then within a year or so, they're in bankruptcy. They lost everything.
Yeah, well, it's not about trying things out. I think it's good to experiment, but the whole principle that goes through the successful stories is that you need a backup plan. You need to keep your basic skills, your basic source of income. You have to keep it intact. If you put everything on, if you bet everything on one card, as you get repeatedly advice in movies, in all these gurus, they tell you, don't, just go for it, just go for it. This is stupid. Don't do that. Always keep a backup plan. One of the strategies that you can do, you can implement very easily to reduce the risk and to reduce the stress in whatever you do, is segmentation. And this is something I learned from one of the figures I present in the book. He was Robert Stephenson. And Stephenson was a financier in the 19th century. He used to do many different projects at the same time with high risk. And in the end, what he became very good at, because he could not know everything, sometimes he made huge mistakes, is to really put segments in his risk, so that he could isolate the different projects. And from time to time, when a project went south, he would just let it go, and then he continued with the rest. And in your life, in your everyday life, I think it's also a very good thing that you organize your day in segments, so that you know what you're going to do more or less. You need some margins, but you need your arrangements, your segments every hour of the day or every part of the day, so that you can go through it relatively calmly and work with high productivity. From time to time, you will get disruptions, but then it affects only one segment. It will not ruin your complete day. And it is super important that you do not let yourself be disrupted by some little detail. You really have to segment your activities, to segment your time, so that you protect your risk, and you know that 90% is going to work well anyway, even if 10% is affected by some disruption.
Interesting. Now, on the book that you wrote, I mean, how many case stories do you go into on this book?
Yeah, usually I got about through about 100 biographies in each book. They're quite short. And then I pick up the 15, 20, which are more spectacular, and I present them in the book. So, for instance, this book has one of the stories, for instance, is about the Templars in the Middle Ages. And I found the story fascinating because this Knights Templar was a military organization, religious military organization in the Middle Ages. They were very powerful, but they disappeared within a few weeks. And this is one of the great mysteries in history. How is it possible that these people, they were extremely effective fighters, had heavy armor, they had castles all around Europe in 200 locations, and within a few weeks they were wiped out, they disappeared from history. I found the principles behind very interesting because the Knight Templars, like many people today, they have organizations, they have companies that look very strong, they look very powerful. But the problem with the Knights Templar is that they had a huge overhead. From the 20,000 people they had, actually only 200 were ready for battle, because otherwise they could have taken up the King of France, because it was the King of France who actually attacked the Templars. But he arrested 10 managers, or 10 leaders from the movement, from the Knights Templar order, and the rest collapsed immediately because they didn't have plans for dealing with contingencies. They didn't have what today you call a business continuity plan. They didn't have that, so they just arrested a few people, and the whole organization collapsed. And they were extremely wealthy. Many young people from the aristocracy in Europe, they were they were members of the Knights Templar, but the whole thing was destroyed within a few weeks. Like you see today, when you look at the stock market, you see companies doing relatively well, and then they start to careen, they start to make mistakes, and they disappear extremely quickly. It's impossible to believe that you see these huge companies within a few weeks, they are almost gone. And this is something, this is a big lesson to learn in your life. Whatever you are doing, no matter how successful, how wonderful your life is, always protect your margins. Don't run a huge overhead. Don't run a lifestyle that is ridiculously expensive, because you make yourself vulnerable. You can always make mistakes, and you need to keep some margins. And the problem with the Knights Templar, like many companies today, is that they didn't have any margins. They were overextended completely all the time. And within a very short period of time, they were hit by a problem and they collapsed. So I think this kind of lessons is what I draw in my book. I go through different history events, and I try to draw principles that people can apply today.
Well, how about keeping people from going through chaos? I mean, being happy doing your job or your business you're in, or even your own personal life. How do you mentioned like segmenting it, breaking up during the day. How do you do that? I mean, some people are so involved in their business that they don't even think about their family or anything other than their business. That comes number one. And I hate to say it, a lot of people do that. Their businesses don't survive.
Well, I think the key to this question is not about balance. And this is something I have found not only in this book, but in previous books. We have this mythology today that your life should be balanced. You should have this many hours for your career, and this many hours for your family, and this many hours for your health. And when you go into history, the principle